Hello, my friends. This is William. I'm back with finally a video for the 1921 diaries. And I do indeed have part of a diary entry for 1921. But I hope I will not dash your hopes because it doesn't talk about Coco. Not yet. I was at the library today. I did the digitization. In fact, I digitized more than 200 pages, and this entire diary volume that talks about the beginning of the affair with Coco Chanel. It's all now in my possession on a USB drive. And great, except I'm feeling rather discouraged because I just now sat down to do the first translation and, of course, discovered that I skipped a page. So I have page 1, page 2, and then page 4, no page 3. It doesn't talk about Coco anyway, but I'm a stickler for such things. And so I will have to go back and get that page tomorrow. I'm not thrilled about that, but what can one do? As I say, it would go very much against the grain for me to skip a page. So, I want to talk about the game plan going forward. So, when I looked at this volume of diaries, I thought, well, we really need to start at page 1 and not jump around. This is an important volume of diaries. As per usual with Dimitri, he will take a whole volume and write only 2.5 or 3 months worth of diary entries because he writes at length. And the brilliant thing about having someone who does that is that you can really allow things to unfold and really watch things develop. So like watching an ongoing multi-season series as opposed to sitting down and seeing a $2 or even $3 or 3-hour movie. You can watch, you can find patterns, and if there's one thing that historians are trained to do, far beyond just learning facts and figures, it's to look for patterns, to bring in the broader context and to look for patterns. And that is something that I want to talk about, oddly enough, in relation to the ethical aspect of doing this. So would Dimitri have wanted a broader public? Not a huge public, but a broader public, even if it's made up of mainly of experts. Would he have wanted them to learn these things about him? Would he have wanted them to have access to his diaries? I think I mentioned before that he did want his diaries to be read, but he refers specifically to posterity, although he includes many things that you wouldn't think a grandparent would necessarily be writing with, or a future grandparent would necessarily be writing with the thought in mind that his children and his children's children and on beyond that, stories that he would want to tell them. Certainly not in many instances. So I think he sometimes he had that in mind and sometimes he didn't. But at any rate, he was always quite candid, and that's what makes him, above all else, a good diarist. But so how would he feel about this? And I have to say my own feelings about it are complex. I'm sure you realize how fond I am of him and how much I feel like I've lived with him for years. And yeah, it does give me pause to think about if I'm doing something that would feel to him like a betrayal. And my answer to that is No, as long as it's done a certain way, as long as it's done so that his story unfolds in a way that does justice to its complexity. So in a sense, I'm as you know, I'm writing a novel, and in a sense, I'm approaching this more as a novelist would than as an academic historian, by which I mean to say that I'm not adding anything fictional, God forbid, but that I'm presenting it to you in a highly interpretive way. Although you have the actual text, you can judge for yourself, but my comments hopefully provide the historical context, but also provide my interpretation. And I think that's important, even more ethical than just putting the straight diary entries out there themselves, because I think, when I come across, and I don't want to criticize anyone, but when I come across excerpts from diaries and letters that are put out there for people who are interested in the Russian imperial family, I have a hard time not, even though I do it myself, I have a hard time not thinking that, yeah, why is this? Why are we doing this? Is it to titillate people? Not in the sense of, erotic material, but in the sense of, I know you're interested of Missy of Romania, so here's an enticing little bit about her. And I do that, but it's not my ideal. My ideal going forward with these videos, and specifically the reason for doing these videos, is so that the story can be presented as a story and can be unfolded and can be developed as it goes along. So nothing is just a titillating little detail. And so that's the decision I've made. When I first started doing these 1921 entries in 1920, I was only going to do the 1906, 1907 diary entries. Then I thought, well, it would be fun to do these as well. And I really started quite randomly with what I was working on at that moment, with what I was focusing my translation work on that moment. But I don't want to do it randomly anymore. I really do want to let it unfold in a coherent way where we can see the patterns and we can see the evolution of Dimitri's thoughts. And so that's why, and that's how I'm justifying to you going back to page 1 of this diary volume and letting Coco's story come in where it naturally did come in, because there were some important things that happened before Dimitri and Coco really came together. You've already seen in the diary entry of the 22nd of January how he met her after 10 years and immediately felt drawn to her, and immediately thinking that maybe things, maybe something could come out of this. But in between that and when his relationship with her really began, there were a host of other things that happened, including the possibility of a marriage, a marital prospect for him, and also a very important political event. And both of those things were important, especially the political event in sort of throwing the two of them together. And so I want you to sort of find out about that organically. Okay, so I'll stop talking about that and just get to, so as I said, this is one of these very long diary entries, and in fact it is 43 pages long, if you can imagine. Pages 1 through 43. The date is the 15th of January, and we've already read his description of what actually happened on the 15th of January. He was still in Monte Carlo. But as I say, the way he approaches time is quite sort of intricate and Byzantine, and it can be confusing. So this diary entry is also dated the 15th of January, and the diary entry he wrote in which he describes the events of 15th January was not written on 15th January. So wrap your head around that. So because I failed to digitalize page 3, I'm only going to read you pages 1 and 2. Otherwise, I would have done more. But here we go. So, 15th January 1921, Saturday, Paris, 78 Rue Miromesnil. It's rather emotional to start my diary for the new year. My God, how many wishes one makes for himself. How many hopes, how many desires are left unspoken in the expectations one forms for what awaits one at the beginning of a new year. Will this young year, 1921, really be another year that dashes my expectations? Will my diaries really again express first joy, then fiery hopes, then only disappointment? When, for God's sake, will that joyful day arrive when I can write in these pages first expectations of what could possibly occur, then the approach of the joyful moment, and then finally the long-awaited realization of my hopes and wishes? I just can't believe that the pages I write this year will contain anything like that. Everything around me is gloomy. Okay, we stop there, and this is very typical. So I have copies of his diary for 1915, and then jumping to 1917, he is expressing the same feelings at the beginning of the year 1917, at the beginning of the year 1918, 1919, 1920. Every year there are hopes that he and the rest of the refugees and exiles will be able to return to Russia, and every year those hopes are completely dashed, and he's beginning to be less optimistic about it. His hopes have been raised to such a fever pitch so many times, but they have never panned out. And in fact, his father has been killed on Ella, Nicholas and Alexandra, so many people. So if he was writing in 1918, he was so amped up with this new age or new thought at that time. It was called philosophy, the power of positive thinking. All he had to do was think positive thoughts, and his desires would be realized. Well, he's begun to be a little more cynical about that. And so, once again, he's writing at the beginning of his diary entries about his hopes, what his hopes are for the year. And my God, what will I be writing at the end of this volume? Will it be great? But this time around, he's more gloomy than usual. He always expresses some skepticism, but this time around he's more gloomy than usual, and quite right, because the Civil War was basically over. Nobody was expecting anymore for there to be even a government, even a white Russian government in Siberia, holding out against the Bolsheviks. Nobody was expecting that anymore. All right, so as I've mentioned a few times in the 1906 diary entries, he had a poetic side to him. And I don't think I've done it justice in my translation. It was rather a hasty translation. But he could express himself very well and very poetically. And so I do my best to convey that. And it gives you a sense of the kind of person he was, as far as he could be quite introspective, and he could kind of look at things, or try to look at things cosmically, you could say, and the irony of it all. But I'm reading too much into this. This is an impression that I have from reading the diaries overall, and not just from this single diary entry. So before I end, I'm 15 minutes into this. Before I end, I want to say something about Dmitri himself. Or rather, not about Dmitri himself, but about you. I would love to get some feedback from all of you about whether you like him, whether you sympathize with him, whether you relate to him. I mean, you can feel bad for somebody even if you don't like that person. Hopefully you like him. But yeah, I mean, it's problematic. It's problematic for me when I read these diary entries, and I think, for God's sake, do something. Do something with the refugees. France is full of Russian refugees who are suffering, who are in poverty, and if you really think of yourself as the emperor to be, then you need to be meeting with these people. And he's not. And I'm not sure that he even really thought about doing that. I mean, I don't know. We think about the 1906 diaries and we see how Maria, as a girl and as someone who was possibly a little less shy, was, going and doing things for sick people and going to hospitals, not just military but civilian hospitals, and meeting with charitable societies. And she was 15, 16 years old. And Dmitri, because his aunt was involved in all those things and because it was sort of the center of her existence, was pushed to do them. But he was a shy kid and he felt like an idiot, he says, just standing there not knowing what to say to people. So I think that was partly still true. It doesn't exonerate him, but yeah, at some level he was still shy. He didn't like to be around new people. That would have been something that he would have had to push himself to do. And in this instance, he didn't have Aunt Ella to push him to do it. And I shouldn't say it doesn't exonerate him, because in the words of Pope Francis, who am I to judge? It's not like I'm out there doing charitable work either. I'm not. Or trying to make people's lives better. But there's sort of an interesting contrast to what the male exiles, white Russian emigres, were doing and what the female white Russian emigres were doing, because, and we're talking about the upper echelons, we're talking about aristocrats and royals, and the women were raised to do this sort of thing, and they were raised to be in that sort of role, and the men were not. The men were raised to, be in this sort of military cultus, not a religious cult, and to be oriented in that way toward politics and the military. And so these men like Dmitri and like his brother-in-law and like all of these Russian generals who are coming to visit him during his at-home hours in the morning, I'm sure they all of them thought that they were doing their duty in relation to Russia and even to the refugees by trying to strategize together and to come up with political plans and to plan for the future when they were able to get back into Russia, and to think of ways that they could, start to infiltrate the government in Russia. So they all conceived of that as a very important task, and that was genuine on their part. I have no doubt about that. But sometimes you just think, would it kill you to go to one of the refugee camps and give people a little bit of a boost? Well, there again, this is me being judgmental. But, it is interesting to me that the women, by and large, seem to have risen to the occasion and the men not so much. So it wasn't just Dmitri. That was kind of, that was kind of the general rule. And we'll see how he was trying to do things in London. He was trying to educate himself in law and economics and things like that so that he could be a good monarch when he was finally made the constitutional monarch of Russia, which is what he saw himself as, not as an autocrat. He was trying to prepare for that role. But, there was this big difference between men with the theoretical level of things and women with the practical, let's roll up our sleeves and do things. Okay, so I've managed to stretch that one little snippet of diary into 20 minutes, so apologies for that, but I will get that missing page tomorrow and we'll be full speed ahead. So please do continue to watch, and I'll see you next time. Bye.